It's quite a startling statistic when you hear it. Somewhere between, 20 and 40% of American Caucasians and British citizens show these signs of immune cells in their thyroids. Lymphocytic infiltration, I think it's called.
It is, yeah. That's a huge number.
It really makes you pause, doesn't it? Especially if you've ever wondered, could my diet be affecting my thyroid health?
That's a perfect lead-in, actually, because today we're diving deep into exactly that connection, focusing on thyroiditis of Hashimoto, or TH for short.
TH, okay.
So TH is an autoimmune condition. Basically, your body's immune system gets confused and starts, well, attacking your thyroid gland.
Like it thinks it's an invader.
Precisely. And that attack can lead to problems, typically decreased thyroid hormones, T3 and T4. You might see TSH, that's thyroid stimulating hormone, go up.
Right.
And crucially, the presence of specific antibodies, AbTPO and AbTG, are the ones we look for.
Okay, so it's clearly affecting a lot of people. And if you're listening and this sounds familiar, you've probably looked into lifestyle changes, and diet is almost always part of that conversation.
Almost always.
So this deep dive is really for you. We want to cut through some of the confusion and see what the science actually says about nutrition and Hashimoto's.
Exactly. We've gone through a pretty comprehensive scientific review that tackles just how complex managing TH with nutrition can be. It looks at environmental factors, diet itself, inflammation, even things like cyanotoxins, which aren't often discussed.
Cyanotoxins, okay, we'll definitely need to unpack that later.
We will. But think of this as, a shortcut. We're trying to distill the core findings from this complex research for you.
Great. So our mission today is to pull out the most important insights. We want to help you understand how different nutritional factors might impact TH based on what the current science suggests. Where should we start?
Well, a good place to begin is how nutrition might actually play a role in developing TH in the first place. The review makes it clear it's not just about lacking certain nutrients.
So having too much can be an issue too.
Exactly. It's about balance. Both deficits and excesses can potentially contribute.
Okay, like iodine maybe? We know you need it for your thyroid, right? Too little causes goiter, hypothyroidism.
Correct. But here's the twist the research points to. Getting too much iodine, especially chronically high intake, might actually, in some genetically susceptible people, trigger autoimmune thyroiditis.
Wow. Okay, so that's a really delicate balance then. Why? Why would too much iodine be a problem for autoimmunity?
The thinking is, in people who are already predisposed, excess iodine might rev up an enzyme called thyroid peroxidase, TPO.
Okay.
This increased activity could lead to more thyroid antigens being produced, essentially, more targets for that mistaken immune attack.
Makes sense. What else falls into this balancing act category? Selenium comes up a lot.
It does. Selenium is crucial. It helps activate and deactivate thyroid hormones, plus it has antioxidant and anti-inflammatory effects. Really important stuff.
But I sense a but coming.
But, yes, you guessed it, high doses can be toxic. Beyond a certain point, selenium can actually flip and become pro-oxidant.
Oh, okay. So it undoes its own good work.
Potentially, yes. So the key isn't avoiding it, but making sure you're in that optimal range. Testing and professional advice are usually best there.
Right. What about iron and zinc? Are they similar stories?
They are, yeah. Iron is needed for that same TPO enzyme we mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
But again, chronic high intake
Mm-hmm.
could have pro-oxidant effects, maybe fuel inflammation. And zinc is important for hormone levels and making sure the receptors for those hormones work properly.
Okay.
But interestingly, with zinc, very low doses might increase oxidative stress. So again, finding that sweet spot.
And vitamin D, we hear so much about that with autoimmune conditions.
Definitely. Low vitamin D levels are very common in people with autoimmune diseases, including TH. It's involved in regulating so many genes, including immune function genes.
But too much is also a problem.
Right. Excess vitamin D can lead to hypercalcemia, too much calcium in the blood, so it's another one needing balance.
It's fascinating, this theme of deficiency and excess, both potentially causing issues. Anything else on the essential nutrient front?
Yes, protein intake is important too. Really low protein can actually downregulate the whole thyroid communication system, the hypothalamic pituitary thyroid or HPT axis.
The command center.
Exactly. If that communication gets disrupted, thyroid function suffers. And one more to mention is inositol, sometimes called vitamin B8. Early research suggests it might help protect the thyroid and improve TSH signaling.
Okay. So we've covered nutrients where the balance is key. What about things that are more straightforwardly, harmful if levels get too high? These toxic nutritional elements?
The review does cover those. Certain trace elements can definitely harm the thyroid if they accumulate. Lead, for example, often from polluted air. It's pro-oxidative and can mess with selenium levels too.
Right.
Then there's cadmium. Think cigarette smoke, burning fossil fuels. That causes oxidative stress, damages mitochondria.
The cell's powerhouses.
Exactly. And fluoride, which can be in drinking water or treated salt. High levels have been linked to more hypothyroidism, especially if someone is also low in iodine.
That's a bit concerning, these environmental exposures. Were others mentioned?
Briefly, yes. Things like manganese, chromium, aluminum, nickel, tin, gallium. High concentrations can have various negative effects like aluminum interfering with cell signaling or nickel being potentially immunotoxic.
Well, what about things we might actually choose to eat? Any plant compounds to be aware of?
That's a key point. The review specifically calls out genistein.
Which is found in?
Soy products.
Yeah.
Genistein is a phytoestrogen, and it seems it can potentially act as a goitrogen.
Meaning it interferes with thyroid function.
Yes. Specifically by inhibiting that TPO enzyme again, the one involved in making thyroid hormones.
So maybe something for people with TH to be mindful of regarding soy intake. Okay, you also mentioned something earlier that sounded quite serious: cyanotoxins.
Yes, cyanotoxins. They sound ominous, and they can be. They're produced by cyanobacteria, blue-green algae, which can bloom in water sources.
Algal blooms.
Yeah, exactly. The review mentions specific types like microcystins and cylindrospermopsin or CYN. These aren't just generally toxic. They seem to increase intestinal permeability.
Ah, the leaky gut connection.
Precisely. That increased permeability could allow things from the gut to enter the bloodstream that shouldn't, potentially triggering or worsening immune responses, including those against the thyroid.
We hear leaky gut linked to autoimmunity quite often. How specifically do these cyanotoxins affect the thyroid?
Well, studies show microcystins, for instance, can directly reduce thyroid hormone levels and even affect the genes involved in making them. But they can also work indirectly by fueling inflammation, disrupting the gut microbes, or even interfering with that main HPT control axis.
So maybe not an everyday risk for everyone, but contaminated water or food could be a factor for some people. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Diet overall, the review talks about how different eating patterns influence inflammation and our gut bacteria, right?
Absolutely. Diet is a huge lever for inflammation levels in the body.
Mm.
You can often see changes reflected in markers like C-reactive protein, CRP.
Okay, so what kinds of dietary patterns did the review look at? What about something called low-residue diet?
Yeah, that one involves cutting back significantly on fiber, so less fruit, veg, whole grains, legumes. Might be used short-term for certain gut issues.
But for TH?
The reviews suggest it doesn't necessarily lower inflammation and could actually reduce the diversity of your good gut bacteria long-term, which isn't ideal.
Okay. Then there's the anti-inflammatory diet. That sounds more promising, especially for autoimmune issues. What does that typically involve?
It does sound promising, and often is. This approach focuses on, well, anti-inflammatory foods. Think prebiotics, probiotics, lots of omega-3s from fatty fish, maybe grass-fed meats, plenty of colorful fruits and vegetables, nuts, healthy fats like olive oil.
And what does it usually limit?
Often things like gluten, lactose, maybe high total fat, and definitely refined carbs and sugars. Studies do show this kind of eating can lower those inflammatory markers like CRP.
Makes sense. I've also heard of an autoimmune diet or autoimmune protocol. How does that differ?
It's generally a stricter version of an anti-inflammatory diet. The autoimmune protocol, or AIP, often removes grains, legumes, dairy, processed foods, refined sugars, sometimes nightshades like tomatoes and peppers, even eggs and nuts initially.
Wow, quite restrictive.
It is. The idea is to really calm gut inflammation and identify specific food triggers by reintroducing foods carefully later on. Focus is usually on nutrient-dense foods like quality meats, fish, most vegetables, and healthy fats.
Okay. The review mentioned several others too, didn't it? Leaky gut diet, Mediterranean.
It did. The leaky gut diet often incorporates specific nutrients like glutamine and zinc, while avoiding common irritants like gluten and dairy and keeping carbs and sugar low. Aimed squarely at gut healing.
In Mediterranean, that's always popular.
And for good reason. Rich in fish, lean meats, whole grains, legumes, nuts, olive oil, fruits, veggies. Well known for reducing inflammation and supporting a healthy gut microbiome. The Nordic diet also got to mention similar focus on whole grains, fish, local produce, showing benefits for things like blood pressure and cholesterol.
So lots of potentially helpful patterns. What about diets that might be less helpful or even harmful in the context of TH and inflammation?
The review flags the typical Western diet.
Ah, the usual suspects.
Pretty much. High in processed foods, refined carbs, unhealthy fats, particularly a high ratio of omega-6 fatty acids compared to omega-3s. This pattern is generally seen as pro-inflammatory.
Right. So our food choices really can sway the inflammatory balance. And that brings us directly to the gut microbiota, doesn't it? Those trillions of microbes. How do they link specifically to Hashimoto's?
The link is becoming much clearer. An imbalance in gut bacteria called dysbiosis can be influenced by our genes, diet, stress, antibiotics, inflammation itself. And this dysbiosis is linked to many inflammatory conditions, including autoimmune thyroid disease.
Okay, how does that connection work, the thyroid-gut axis?
Yes, the thyroid-gut axis. One way is through nutrient absorption. Our gut microbes play a role in how well we absorb key thyroid minerals: iodine, selenium, zinc, iron.
Ah, so if the microbes are out of whack, absorption suffers.
Exactly. An imbalance could mean you're not getting enough of these essential minerals even if you're consuming them. Specific bacteria matter too. The review mentions Lactobacilli and Bifidobacterium species.
Okay.
They seem to have a complex relationship, maybe hindering iron absorption but helping with selenium and zinc, and these types are often found in lower numbers in people with TH.
Interesting. So supplementing with probiotics might help?
Potentially. Some animal studies, like one with Lactobacillus reuteri, showed improved thyroid function, possibly by boosting regulatory T cells or Treg cells.
Trig cells, those are the immune system's peacekeepers, right? Helping prevent autoimmunity.
That's a great way to put it, yes. They help keep the immune system in check.
So it's not just which bacteria are there, but also what they produce, these metabolites.
Absolutely. Things like short-chain fatty acids, or SCFAs, produced when bacteria ferment fiber, are generally anti-inflammatory and good for gut health. But other metabolites, like lipopolysaccharides or LPS from certain bacteria, can be very pro-inflammatory if they leak into the bloodstream.
Okay.
There was even a simulation model mentioned that suggested gut dysbiosis could lead to fewer of those Treg peacekeeper cells and more Th17 cells, which are more inflammatory. This kind of immune imbalance is often seen in Hashimoto's.
Such a complex interplay.
Very.
Now, the review also singled out vitamin D and melatonin. We touched on vitamin D, but what's the specific focus here in relation to TH?
Right. Both vitamin D and melatonin are key regulators for our endocrine system and our immune system, and their production is tied to our light-dark cycles, or circadian rhythm.
Highlighting the importance of things like sleep and light exposure.
Exactly. Given that TH is an immune-driven condition, researchers are very interested in how these two might play a role.
And we know vitamin D deficiency is common in TH. Why is that potentially significant?
Well, vitamin D is crucial for how immune cells develop and function. It helps regulate the production of cytokines, those immune signaling molecules. A deficiency can throw this regulation off balance, potentially contributing to autoimmune problems.
But the review said there's no clear consensus on supplementation yet.
Correct. While the deficiency is common and getting levels checked is often recommended, the research hasn't definitively shown that supplementing universally improves TH outcomes across the board. Recommended daily allowances exist, of course, but specific therapeutic use for TH needs more evidence and should be guided by a healthcare provider.
Okay. And melatonin, we usually think of it for sleep.
We do, but it's also a powerful antioxidant and has significant effects on the immune system. It's produced on a circadian rhythm, mainly at night.
And there's an interaction with vitamin D?
There seems to be, yes. Their levels might influence each other. One study mentioned in the review actually suggested melatonin supplementation might improve thyroid hormone levels and even mood in women with hypothyroidism.
Oh, that's interesting.
It is, but it's just one study. The researchers strongly caution that we need more robust trials to confirm if it's safe and effective enough to be a standard treatment. Its antioxidant properties might also directly protect the thyroid gland itself.
So, bottom line for both vitamin D and melatonin in TH, potentially important roles, but not quite ready for prime time as standard treatments based on current evidence.
That's a very fair summary of what the review suggests. Research is definitely ongoing, but we're not at the point of universal recommendations for supplementation specifically for TH treatment, and melatonin's effects can vary a lot with dose.
Right. Okay, so we've covered a lot about influencing factors. What about practical nutritional strategies? What does the research suggest people with TH could actually focus on in their diet?
The review groups these into a few categories. A major one is focusing on anti-inflammatory nutrients. These are compounds that can directly influence the genes involved in inflammation.
Like what, specifically?
Table 5 in the review listed several. Magnesium, dietary fiber really important, and various fatty acids. The balance between omega-3s, omega-6s, and omega-9s is key here.
We hear lots about omega-3s, obviously. Any other standouts?
Resveratrol, found in things like grapes and berries, it has antioxidant and anti-inflammatory effects. Though, interestingly, the review noted very high doses might potentially interfere with thyroid function in some people, so again, balance.
Okay.
Gingerol and Shogale from ginger also show anti-inflammatory actions, omega-9s, like from olive oil, and various flavonoids, those colorful compounds in plants. Modified citrus pectin, MCP, was also mentioned as potentially beneficial.
And what about the idea of supporting detoxification? The liver comes up a lot in overall health discussions.
Yes, supporting the body's natural detox pathways, particularly the liver, is seen as potentially helpful for overall well-being when dealing with TH. Table 6 in the review listed foods thought to help.
Such as?
Things like beetroot, broccoli, and other crucifers, lemon, pomegranate, watermelon, avocado, apple, turmeric, blueberries, cilantro, ginger. Common healthy foods, really.
But with a caution.
Yes. Always the caution that some foods, even healthy ones, might interact with medications or have side effects for certain individuals. Cruciferous vegetables, for example, are sometimes debated in thyroid conditions, though usually fine unless iodine intake is very low.
Yeah.
Professional guidance is key if making big changes.
So it really sounds like the overall picture points towards a whole foods balanced, generally anti-inflammatory way of eating rather than one magic bullet.
That's definitely the sense you get. The review uses the term ecological dietary regimen, emphasizing that foundation. While we wait for more definitive research on specific supplements like vitamin D or melatonin for TH treatment, focusing on that balanced anti-inflammatory dietary base seems to be the most evidence-supported strategy right now.
Okay, let's try to wrap this up. If we had to summarize the key takeaways from this deep dive for someone listening with Hashimoto's, what would they be?
I'd say first, nutrition clearly plays a really big, complex role. It's not simple. Second, it's about balance, both not enough and too much of certain nutrients like iodine, selenium, zinc can matter. Third, your overall diet pattern strongly influences inflammation and gut health.
Which are both super relevant to TH.
Exactly. They're intricately linked. And fourth, while things like vitamin D and melatonin are important for immune and endocrine health, we don't yet have solid proof they're standard treatments specifically for TH, though addressing deficiencies is always wise.
Right. So, no single magic diet, but a clear emphasis on balance, reducing inflammation, and nurturing that gut health. For you listening, it really underscores the value of looking at your own diet and maybe discussing these points with your doctor or a knowledgeable practitioner.
Absolutely. And it leaves us with a thought, doesn't it? Considering how complex this connection is, how might we see truly personalized nutrition plans tailored to individual genetics, gut microbiome, nutrient status, becoming a much bigger part of effectively managing Hashimoto's in the future?
That's a fascinating question. Definitely food for thought.
It really is. There's so much potential there.
Okay, and one final, very important reminder for everyone. This deep dive was based on the scientific review we discussed, and it's purely for informational purposes. It is absolutely not medical advice.
Please don't make changes based solely on this.
Right. Any changes to your diet, any supplements you're considering, you absolutely must discuss them with your healthcare professional first. They know your individual situation. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.